きいかがですか? Watanabe Dan desu. On today's episode of Japanese Movies You've Never Seen, we're going to flash back to Japan's Renaissance era, the 1950s and 1960s. At that time, the Japanese film industry was broken into two groups. The first of these groups were the filmmakers who fully embraced the Western incursion, the amount of money that movies like Godzilla were able to make, and the fact that the exoticism of directors like Kurosawa Akira and Ozu Yasujiro were able to bring to the picture. There was a second group, which were more left-wing filmmakers who tried to make things that were about art and the human condition and some of the challenges they felt with the westernization of the country. This film falls into the second of those two categories. Its title is Onibaba, which means demon old lady. And it's by no means a positive term. When you call someone an Onibaba, you better be ready to fight with their offspring, because that's not a nice thing to say to anyone. The movie takes place in war era Japan, Sengoku Jidai Japan, and 14th century in more Western traditions. And it deals with the war in a way that we hardly expect. Perhaps this is because of the director, Shindo Kaneto, who had made, among other pictures, The Naked Island, about this island that is far removed from the mainland, and everyone spends their entire life being miserable, hauling water by hand up the hills to help eke out their meager existences. So he was not someone who was necessarily making happy Kinoshita Keisuke type musicals. So this was something that took audiences by shock. And of course, one of the reasons that it took audiences by shock was it was also very violent, and it had a lot of nudity in it, and it had all these other things that for many years, not only in Japan but in the West, were used as a way of bringing people into more artistic fare, because you could claim it was art and therefore be on the verge of pornography, so to speak. The movie stars Otowa Nobuko, who plays the mother. And she had been a Japanese star since around 1950. And she would go on to be one of Japan's top stars all the way through to her death in 1994. Being married to Shindo probably allowed her to be convinced to run around naked for big chunks of the movie, because certainly she never did it in any other film, and certainly he never asked her to. Otherwise, she would have probably bashed him over the head, because her reputations definitely went through a little bit of a scandal because of what she did in the film. Less impacted by that was, of course, Yoshimura Jitsuko, who played her daughter-in-law. And she, of course, runs around naked as well, but she's a young woman, so everyone kind of expected that of these huzzy, young, modern Japanese girls. The guy in it is played by Satoke, who was known for a lot of samurai movies and also for being a very intense actor. So we have very good credentials in this film, and we have a lot of commercial elements in it. Remember, it's mixing three very, very popular genres: the jidaigeki, or period piece, the obake movie, or horror movie, and kind of a new Freudian style of real character drama. The story deals with a mother-in-law and her daughter, who are, quite frankly, SOL. Their son has gone off to the war. They are pretty much left to starve. And eventually they have figured out a way to make a living. And that way to make a living is to look for ronin samurai. These are the guys who have either given up or were independent contractors, so to speak, and who were always roaming around the countryside. What they would do is kill these guys, drop their bodies into a very convenient nearby deep pit, and then sell the armor for rice. Well, Satoke returns to town. He was their friend and he was their neighbor. And he lets them know that to make their already bad situation much, much worse, sort of to add a maraschino cherry on top of the fermented banana split sundae that was their lives, that their son is dead. So now they really are in trouble. They're in even more trouble because, of course, Satoke is taking a look at Yoshimura Jitsuko and saying, wow, you're really attractive. And now that my buddy, whom I might have killed, is out of the way, perhaps we can run around and have some fun. Not having it, of course, is Otowa Nobuko. She's looking at this and going, oh, hell to the no. You're not about to take my only chance of survival away from me. But there's not really much she can do. Enter a deus ex machina, and this deus ex machina takes the form of a soldier who shows up at their house one night and pretty much frightens Otowa Nobuko to death because he happens to have an obake mask on, a demon mask on. He can't take it off. And she kind of seduces him and leads him out and kind of takes in that he says he's one of the most handsome men ever or whatever, and lets him fall into the pit, because of course she didn't bother to tell him it was there. Climbing down into the pit, she removes the mask and sees that his face is all scarred horribly. Of course, she comes up with a great idea. How about putting on that mask and frightening to death her daughter and the errant neighbor? And she does, and it turns out to be a highly successful ploy, to the point where the young girl is petrified of the thought of even going out. Of course, though, sex desires are stronger than common sense, so she goes anyway. Unfortunately, one night it's raining, and when Otowa Nobuko returns home, she finds to her horror the mask won't come off. So she must confess to her daughter-in-law what she has done. Her daughter-in-law, of course, is not happy to hear this news. But still, hey, filial loyalty is there. So she helps the mother smash the mask, only to find that the old woman's face is scarred as well. She runs in terror from her, and the old woman chasing after her, saying, I'm a human being, before falling into the pit. Least we think this means that Yoshimura now has a free rein to run off with Satoke. No, unfortunately, he has returned to his cabin one night, and a hungry beggar killer was there and killed him. So now we see that Yoshimura is probably really in trouble, but the story has ended, so we never really know what happened to her. This movie took the international community by shock. First of all, because it was so bleak. This is not a traditional Chanbara samurai epic with beautiful palaces and people doing athletic and almost superhuman maneuvers to do their samurai acts. No, these are ugly people. These are people who are poor. These are people who are incompetent. These are people who are not attractive in any way, and they're fighting. They're fighting in an almost animalistic style. There's none of the grace that we have come to expect from a traditional Japanese Chanbara picture. Further, in terms of the Obake movies, while it has that iconography of the ghost standing up in the field and terrifying everybody, we know she's a human. We know it's the mother who's playing a trick on them. And sure enough, like in O. Henry's story, she gets or Rod Serling Twilight Zone episode, she gets the short end of the stick and gets punished for it. But still, it's not a traditional horror, even though we have moments when she's floating over the grassy reeds and looking like a demonic figure. And in terms of an ending, yeah, we have justice served in that the old lady's going to now fall to her death, but it's still inconclusive. Now, I have a personal history with Onibaba that kind of sort of underlines why I still have a certain kinship for this movie, even though I find it to be very odd and, in fact, very off-putting at times. And that is that in the 1970s, when I was just a little kid, I had found this book called Horror in the Cinema by Ivan Butler, which was my first real cinema book that I ever read. It's in like third grade or something like that. And it had mentioned a number of horror movies, which I would, of course, watch on Money Movie 7. And one of the movies it mentioned a lot was they had a whole chapter on Onibaba, and so I was determined to see it. And at the same time, my parents were getting pretty disgusted with me because the only movies I ever wanted to see in the theater were blaxploitation movies, whether they be Uptown Saturday Night or Cleopatra Jones or Cotton Comes to Harlem or something like that. Perhaps blame it on Get Christy Love or Shaft, which were then TV series, and I was really enjoying them. And perhaps I was enjoying them because, as the only Asian in my entire elementary school and one of two Asians in my junior high, I had kind of a kinship with anyone who was an outsider. I even liked Alan Arkin's movie Poppy, which I don't think anyone even remembers was made, nor should they. And so my dad made a deal with me, thinking that he was all that in a bag of chips, forgetting that I was already a sneaky kid at that point. And he agreed to take me to certain of the non-R-rated blaxploitation movies. So there went Superfly TNT. If I would go and see Japanese movies with him, thinking that I would get to see Shichinin no Samurai, Seven Samurai, or Tengoku to Jigoku High and Low, or any of these other great classics. And they happened to be having a Japanese film festival at that time. So of course I say sure, because one of the movies that was playing was Kaidang. And the other one was Onibaba, and the third was Lake of Dracula. I can't even remember the Japanese title of that, but he agreed to take me to them, and I was able to get him to take me to see Blackula, which of course became one of my favorite movies. And of course, we're looking at Onibaba, and my dad is getting nervous as hell because of all the nudity and all of the sexuality and all that other stuff in it. And I think he realized at that point that not rated was the same thing as an R rating, and even though we'd made a deal, he kind of welched on it for some of the later movies, so I didn't get to see Kuroneko, which was kind of the sequel to Onibaba, until much later, but that was okay. It's not that great. And one of the other things that I found fun to do with Onibaba was to compare it to American movies that were also about the kind of Onibaba type actresses, whether they be Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, or Geraldine Page and Ruth Gordon and Whatever Happened to Aunt Alice, or my own personal favorite Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and start to do weird comparisons of it, which I'm sure made my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Holden, quite nervous. But be that as it may, Onibaba was fundamental to me in terms of my own learning spree of film. And even though it was inappropriate for me to see it at such a young age, it has nonetheless stuck with me. And no, I didn't get any of the political commentary. I wasn't getting that Kaneto Shindo was doing a criticism of Japan as always having been very warrior in nature and always being very crude despite an exterior veneer of propriety and bushido. So it would come later when I would get that nuance. It would also come later when Otowa Nobuko would become one of my favorite actresses, and then I suddenly realized it was the same actress who was running around topless in this movie, and I was like, oh, that's very interesting. So it's still a movie that I feel is worth seeing, in spite of the fact that it can be a little bit didactic, it can be a little bit slow, but when it really works, and the fact that there's really nothing like it just reminds us that that's why we love the movies. And isn't that what this is all about?